You are in for an interesting ride.
Well, hello, folks. And guess who is my guest? Can you see? Oh, yes, Mr. Boucher. So he is joining me for episode 2 because when we did episode 1, that was pretty amazing stuff. But in episode 2, we're going to hear about more abductions and from quite a large group. So you're going to find this fascinating. So Steve is joining me from Canada, all the way over in St. Catharines. And this is the 10th of August, 2023. I'm Joanne Summerscales of the ET Newsroom, also known as ETN.
The snow gently settles on the trees outside. But here in our cabin, we're both snuggling.
Steve, thank you so much for coming back to join me for a second episode. And I really wanted you to come back because it's not every day you hear about the kind of incredible experiences that you've had, and I don't want to spoil it for everybody. So perhaps you could go straight into your music, your band, Harmony Grove, a very incredible event that happened as you were setting up in this pub. So, Steve.
Well, the initial incident where my band was abducted, we went over that in the first episode, but there was kind of a sequel to it that I didn't really expect, but it just kind of came up in my memory. And that was one day that we decided we were going to play at the Brock Pub, which was called Alfie's Trough. It was in the back of Brock University in St. Catharines. And we had a gig there, and so drove down there, and we had this thing that was like a dolly with wheels on it and a rope to pull it. And we'd pile all the amplifiers and equipment on there, and we pulled it down one of the main hallways at Brock University. And at the end of the hallway, I knew there was a room and a door which led straight out to Alfie's Trough. We started going down the hallway with all the equipment and the guitars and everything. And as we were walking down the hallway, it seemed kind of strange in there. Like I noticed at the end of the hallway, there were some beings that I saw walk by a couple of times, and they looked like gray aliens. So I said to the guys, did you see that? I said, it looks like there's some beings at the end of the aisle, like end of the hallway. It looks like gray aliens or something. And they said, yeah, it did look a bit like aliens, you know, and they definitely weren't human.
Steve, did the guys, were they surprised? I mean, it sounds like it was just like business as usual. Gray aliens, so okay then.
They found it kind of unusual. Like, you know, we all found it kind of strange that these beings were there because they were right where we were headed to. I had been to Brock University a number of times. I'd seen plays there, and there was a doorway at the end of the hall that led into an amphitheater. I saw one of the beings open that door and go in there. And so I was thinking to myself, when we get down to that door, I'm going to open it and take a look in there and see what I can see. So we got to where the doorway was, and I opened it, and everything was just pitch black in there. You couldn't see anything. So I shut the door, and we continued. And as soon as we turned the corner at the end of the hallway, they were there. There was like at least 3 beings, and they immediately came over to us and separated us from each other. And there was one other being that was kind of watching it. There was a roll-up door on the back wall that they had kind of like a confectionery there where they sold pop and chips and peanuts and things like that. And that door was open, and the being was standing in there with the light on watching us. He said, where are you guys going? And I said, well, we have a gig at the Brock Pub. We're headed to, you know, we were trying to get over the initial shock of seeing these beings. And the guitarist's girlfriend was with us, and she kind of let out a scream when she saw them. And so anyway, the being was speaking to me telepathically. It was a gray being, and he looked like this. This is a drawing that I did of one of them. He said, "Where are you guys going?" I said, "We have to play at this bar in the back of Brock." And he said, "Is this something that you're going to be paid for?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Then they're expecting you. You'll be missed." And I said, "Yes." And so he turned to the other beings that were with him and he said, "We have to let them go. They'll be missed." There was 4 beings, I think, 3 of them that each came to one of us. There was more of us than there were of them, though. We had 4 members of the band and the guitarist's girlfriend, who later became his wife. So anyway, he said, "We have to let them go. They'll be missed." So he brought us over to the door where we were going out to the bar. And he said, "As soon as you leave here, you're going to forget everything that happened. You're going to forget this." So we opened the door and we started to walk out toward the bar. And sure enough, we completely forgot that we'd ran into aliens or that there was anything like that there. It just totally went out of our mind. So we walked up the set of steps. They were like wooden steps that went up to the bar. And I just happened to glance over the railing and I spotted one of these beings heading toward the back of Brock University. And I said, "Hey, look there." And Anne-Marie, the guitarist's girlfriend, looked and I said, "It looks like an alien or something." And she said, "Yeah, it does." And then he kind of disappeared out of sight. So at that point, we'd been banging on the door of the bar and the bartender came over and let us in. He could see we were the band. So he said, well, he brought us over to the stage area and he said, "You can set up here." I believe this was a Saturday night, you know. So we set up our equipment.
What sort of time would it be by now?
What time? Probably around 9, maybe 9:30. We set up our equipment. We were paid to play, so we played a set. Basically, we just played for the bar staff. So when we finished our set, we sat down at a table and we had a couple of drafts. I could see that there was nobody there except the bar staff. And I found that really unusual for a Saturday night. And I said to the bartender, "When does it get busy here?" I said, "You know, nobody's arrived yet." I said, "When do they start to arrive?" And he said, "Well," he said, "this is a Saturday night." And he says, "Normally the bar would be packed on a night like this." And he said, "They should be arriving shortly." So we finished our break and we got up and we started to play another set. And we were just, again, playing for the bartenders. Nobody had showed up. So we finished the second set and we sat down for a break. And the bartender came over and I said, "Where is everybody? When do they show up?" And he said, "I can't understand it." He said, "Usually on a night like this, they would be packed." And he asked me, I found it kind of funny. He said, "Did you guys do something to piss off your audience so that they wouldn't show up?" And I said, "No, we usually get a good crowd." And he said, "Well, I don't understand it." And he said, "You guys showed up and you played a couple of sets, but by this time it was probably around 11 o'clock or so, and it should have been packed by then." He said, "I'll pay you for showing up and playing," but he said, "You might as well pack up your stuff and leave because it doesn't look like anybody is going to show up." So we found that really strange. And so we started packing up our equipment, rolling up our cords and stuff. And the guitarist came over to me and he said, "Can you go back to the van and get the dolly and bring it here so we can load the stuff on it?" He handed me his keys and I said, "Sure." And my stuff was all packed. I was ready to go. So I left and I started heading back down that hallway toward where we parked. And by this time, I'd had a couple of beers and I was needing to use the facilities. So I started looking around for a washroom. I knew there was a washroom down this other hallway somewhere. So I went down this other hallway that I wouldn't normally go down, and everything was so quiet. There didn't seem to be anybody in there. And then I turned the corner to where I believe the washrooms to be, and I saw all these people all standing in a row all the way down the hall. And there must have been like 150 to 200 people there. And they were all just standing there, and none of them were talking to each other, which I found kind of strange. They were just standing there like they're in some kind of a trance or something. So I walked up to this woman there. I said, can you tell me why you guys are all standing around here? And she said, well, the men told us to stand here. And I said, the men, you mean teachers? And she said, no, these were some men, and they told us to stand here and not talk to each other. And I found that kind of strange. And then suddenly it occurred to me that all these people, this was our audience. And this is why they hadn't shown up at the bar. They were all standing here in this hallway. So I went and I used the washroom quickly. And when I came out, I was going to talk to this woman again. And then I noticed a man came in from the back door, and he noticed me standing talking to this woman. And he said, you there, why aren't you standing in line with the others? And I said, because whatever this is, I'm not a part of it.
And that was a human being, was it?
He looked human, yeah. So I didn't think anything of it, really. And then he said, well, go and stand with them now and don't talk to each other. Just stand there and wait for your turn. So I said, I can't. I have to go and get the dolly to bring to the bar so we can load the equipment on it. And I said, I've got to go. I'm not part of this. The woman had told me that these men were coming to take them a few at a time. And she didn't tell me where. But anyway, he said, well, can you come with me right now then? And I said, well, I haven't really got time, but I guess I can. I didn't know what he had in mind. So I followed him out the door, and it was winter time and the snow was all over the ground. And I noticed there were like hundreds of sets of footprints that all went in a straight line to this corner of the building at the back of the university. And they disappeared around the corner. So as I was walking with this guy, I was getting a really strange feeling. And every time I looked at him, he was starting to look less and less human and more like a gray alien. So I knew something was up. And as soon as we got around the corner, there was a large saucer-shaped craft sitting there on the pavement, and it was kind of hidden by the building. There was a ramp going up to it, and like an arched doorway open. And I could see lights in there, and I could tell there was some kind of activity going on. And he brought me up this ramp, and a woman came to the entrance to this thing. And she looked like a nurse, like a Red Cross nurse, and she was dressed that way. He said to her, can you take this guy now? He has to go somewhere. And she says, no, I can't take him now. She says, I've got too many people in here as it is. And he said, well, he has to go somewhere. So this is our only chance. Take him now. And she said, no, I can't take him now. And he said, well, what should I do with him? And she says, I don't know, take him where he has to go. So he brought me back down the ramp. He said, where do you have to go? And I said, well, I was going to go to the van and get the dolly, but I said, it's been a while now and they're going to wonder where the heck I got to. So I said, I think I should follow the road and we'll walk back to the bar so I can explain what happened to me. So he said, okay. And he started walking with me toward the bar. And after we got a certain distance, I noticed the van parked at another entrance, not the one we came out of, but a little further down. And I saw the guys loading the amps and the equipment into the van. When I saw that, I knew that I was in trouble. I said, they're going to be really mad at me. I said, because I just disappeared on them. And I said, can you come with me and explain to them why I didn't go to the van, and he said, no, I can't. He says, I have to leave. They need me. And I said, well, it'll only take a second. He said, no, I've got to go. I noticed that there was a fence there and a tree. And I said, can you go and stand by the tree? So at least when I talk to them, I can point to you and say I was with that guy there. And he said, yes, I can do that. So he went over and he stood by the fence and the tree. I walked over to the van, and my last name is Boucher, but my nickname was Boucher. So when they saw me, they said, Boucher, where the heck did you get to? They said, we thought you'd abandoned us. And if we hadn't had another set of keys hidden on the van, we wouldn't have been able to get in. And you had the keys, and we were going to leave you behind because we didn't know where you went. And I said to them, well, I was with that guy over there. And I pointed to the fence and to the tree where the guy was standing. And as I was doing that, I noticed that he was getting less and less visible. He was disappearing. And they said, what guy? And I said, over there. And they looked, and by this time, he completely vanished. They said, there's no guy there. And I said, well, he was there just a second ago. He's like an alien or something. And they said, oh, Boucher, why are you giving us this story? That's pretty lame. They were mad at me, and they didn't want to talk to me for the rest of the trip home. And shortly after that, the band split up. And that was the main reason for it, I think, because they blamed me for this.
But that was pretty stunning, wasn't it? I mean, an entire corridor of 100 or 200 people. Maybe at the time it didn't register, but I'm sure afterwards you must have been thinking, oh, my Lord.
Well, when I saw all those people there, I knew it was our audience. And that's why they never showed up at the bar. So as these people were coming into Brock to head to the Brock pub, they must have been abducting them like they tried to do to us. Had them all lined up in this hallway, and they were taking them in groups at a time. Somebody that remembered that incident said that there was some kind of a flu or a disease that was going around, and that they were taking people and inoculating them on this ship,
Oh.
But I don't know, that was just hearsay. Anyway, I was in trouble with the band, and that was the end of it.
And what about the memory of this, Steve? How did that pan out for you?
Well, this was something that I actually remembered consciously. But when I was in New York City and I met Bud Hopkins, he took me to the hypnotist that did most of the cases in his book, Missing Time. I knew a little bit about hypnosis, not a lot, but I knew that they could do something like a post-hypnotic suggestion. So I asked Dr. Clamar if she could do a post-hypnotic suggestion on me to help me remember over the next few weeks and all of what happened to me. And she agreed to do that, and she did do that. So I was sort of preconditioned from that to remember various incidents that had happened to me. And I think that's probably why I remembered consciously. I remembered some other incidents consciously as well. This one came back in fragments. I kind of put it together in my mind so that it made sense to me, so that I understood what happened.
Well, I have to say, I don't think I've ever heard of an entire band being taken and then on another occasion, their audience. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal.
Well, I have heard similar incidents relating to large groups of people. Like at one time, a ship appeared over a football stadium and the entire audience saw it. And it came down pretty low, so it was huge.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly where that happened, but I did read about that case. So there are cases where they appear to a lot of people.
And what about some of these other memories that you've remembered as well, Steve?
I kind of made a list here of what I haven't talked about. Yeah, there was an incident that happened when I was probably around 14 or 15. I was with a friend of mine that gave him the pseudonym Ken Johnson. That's the pseudonym they used for him in the Q-Form Journal. And we were walking through a place in St. Catharines. It's a wooded area called Short Hills Park. There's a Boy Scout camp kind of attached to it further down. But so we walked through Short Hills Park on this hike. And there was a big, tall hill, like a ridge, that went for quite a ways. And we were walking up the hill toward the top of this ridge. And when I came over the top, I saw there was this familiar saucer-shaped craft sitting directly on our path. You know, we couldn't see it from further down, but as soon as we got up to near the top, we could see it. So my friend and I were kind of shocked to see this. And for some reason, I said, I want to get a closer look. And he said, I don't think we should. I think we should get out of here right now. And I said, I'm just going to take a look, because I noticed that the hatch was open on the side of it. So I walked around to the side and I just kind of peeked in the hatch, and I couldn't see anything in there. Couldn't see anybody inside or anything. So I went up the steps into it, and there was nobody in there. There was just some control panels and seats, pretty big, bigger inside than it did from the outside. And one thing unusual that I found when I looked inside was there was a big, huge chair sitting over in one part of the ship. It was a huge chair. And I wondered, what is this big chair for? And then I heard my friend yell from outside, they're coming, come on, quick, we got to get out of here. So I ran down the steps and I looked behind my friend. There was 4 of these gray beings, and they were heading towards us. So we decided that what we would do is run down the bank, and we knew there was a big open field next to the road if we could get down the bank there. And so we ran down the bank through the trees, and we got to the field, and I glanced behind me and I could see the 4 beings standing at the top of the ridge, and they were pointing something at us, and they had seen us, and they knew that I was inside the ship. So they had this thing pointed at us, and I didn't know what it was. I thought, if it's a gun or something like that. So I started zigzagging, because it's harder to hit a moving target. And we were running for our lives, pretty much. And then I felt something hit me in the back. I immediately, all my muscles seized up and I fell. And I was laying in this tall grass. And the same thing happened to my friend. I could see him from where I was, but all I could move was my eyes, basically. And so I was very limited in the range that I could see. We were laying there on the ground, both kind of paralyzed. And I could hear branches breaking and something that sounded like loud footsteps heading toward me. And I was trying to turn my head to see what it was, but all I could see was this foot, and it was like a big hairy foot. And I felt this thing reach down and it grabbed me. We were both pretty skinny guys back then, and it picked me up from the waist. And it grabbed my friend and picked him up from the waist. And he had one of us in each of his arms. And he started walking up the bank. And at that point, I realized that this was what they would call a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot, you know?
Amazing, Steve.
Yeah. So anyway, it brought us up to the top of the bank and dropped us on the ground. And the beings took over from there. And they brought us into the ship. And this Bigfoot thing followed them up the stairs into the craft, and they brought it over to this big, huge chair and sat it down in the chair. And I realized then what that chair was for. You know, they were using this creature as kind of like a beast of burden to do their heavy tasks for them.
In your opinion, did it seem to be autonomous, there of its own volition, or did it seem to be under the control of these beings?
Couldn't really say for sure. I could tell that it was intelligent, but I didn't know if it was voluntarily helping these beings or if they had it under their control. So they sat it in this chair, and they brought my friend over to like a gurney type of thing, and they had him get up on the gurney and lay down. So I was very afraid of this Sasquatch thing. It was extremely intimidating because of its size and all this hair on it.
And was there any smell or any communication or anything else about the creature? Was there any sound it made?
I didn't notice. I've heard people say that usually that they have like a horrible smell or a wet dog smell or something like that, but I didn't really notice. I was just focused on what it looked like, and I was kind of freaked out. So they brought me over to a bench and sat me down in this bench, and they said, "We'll come back for you." So I was sitting on this bench, directly looking at this being, at this Bigfoot thing. And I couldn't take my eyes off it. I was so intimidated by its size.
Well, we're hearing a most extraordinary story, and I have heard about Bigfoot, Yeti, Sasquatch, all of those guys being involved with ET, but I hadn't actually met anybody who'd had that experience.
I was basically facing this thing, this Bigfoot creature. It was very intimidating to look at. It had this long fur, and it was sitting in this chair, and it was staring at me just as I was staring at it. I wasn't sure if this thing was going to suddenly come back to life all of a sudden and attack me.
Did it just seem to be like staring at you, or was it just sort of observing you? Could you really tell if it was focusing on you or not, or did it seem to be in a trance of some kind?
It did. It wasn't moving. It was completely still, sitting in this chair. And I think they had some wires going to it or going to the chair, but it just sat there staring at me, and I was staring at it. I was thinking these thoughts like, what am I going to do if this thing suddenly jumps up and lurches at me or something, you know? So I was sitting here looking at it, and one of the gray aliens came over to me. He got my attention. He said, "Stop staring at him. You're making him nervous." And I found that kind of funny, but it sort of broke the ice, you know? And I tried not to look at it anymore. I kept looking down, but I couldn't resist. I had to keep peeking at it every now and then to make sure it was still sitting there, not moving, you know.
What sort of height would you say this one was, Steve?
At least 8 or 9 feet high. So that's all I could remember consciously of that incident. And I'm hoping that later I can have a hypnosis session and delve into it in greater detail, because I don't know what happened after that. I don't remember them putting us back, you know, or seeing them leave or anything like. So there's more to that story that's kind of buried in my subconscious somewhere.
So you don't remember being on the gurney like your friend?
I don't remember. I remember, I guess, later on of us walking. I think we had bicycles at that time. We each had a bike, and I probably had the bikes chained up somewhere, you know. I wish I could remember the rest of it, because there's more to this story.
Oh, it's phenomenal. And when you sort of found yourselves and your bikes all going on your way with one another, did you have any sense of something unusual that had just happened, or had your minds been wiped at that time? How did that work?
I can't remember. I can't remember anything after that being coming up telling me not to stare at him. I think I was probably making him mad, and that's why the being told me stop looking at him, you know.
Yeah, on your way home. Did you just sort of find yourself at home?
Actually, I don't remember anything after that. I did get home somehow. I'm guessing that we probably had our bikes with us, because we used to bike to a lot of places, and it's too far from home that we would have walked there. So But anyway, that's all I remember of that incident. I'm hoping that later I can have it followed up with another hypnosis session.
Yeah, it's pretty phenomenal that you remember what you remembered anyway. I mean, that's
Mhm.
incredible.
I was with a girlfriend. I gave her the pseudonym Cindy. Cindy's parents, they didn't like me much for some reason. And whenever we went out, they'd follow us in their pickup truck and park down the road. And a few times we would come out of a bar or something and we'd see the pickup truck way down about 2 blocks down. And she always used to recognize it before I did. Anyway, when we dated, we used to like to try to go somewhere where they couldn't see us, where they couldn't follow us. And so there was this old building. I think it used to be called Wallace's in St. Catharines. It was a big building with like a promenade on the top, and it had an elevator, and the elevator in it was one of those old-fashioned elevators where it had an elevator operator, and he used to pull the gate closed when you got in. It was like a scissor mesh gate, you know, and he'd lock it, and then he'd push the buttons and take us to the floor that we were going to. This was an old building, and they were dismantling it, and it's now the parking lot for the new core block building. And at the time, they had that whole section of the street blocked off, put up 2x4s and nailed plywood to it so people couldn't get in there, because I guess it was kind of half demolished. And so I was walking with her, and we noticed that one of the plywood panels was loose. So I pulled on it and I looked inside, and it didn't look really dark in there. It wasn't dark enough yet, but it was kind of dimly lit. And so I thought, hey, this is a place that maybe we could go in to get away from the prying eyes of parents, you know. So I held the plywood open, and she went in, and then I went in. We were looking around, and the whole front of the building was basically gone. The promenade was still there, but it was kind of hidden in darkness. All that really stood out that I could see that was close to where we came in was a big heavy metal desk, big iron desk with what looked like a linoleum top. I think the old-fashioned desks that had these linoleum tops. And so we went over and we sat on that desk. We started to get a little frisky, you know. We were kind of making out. And then I glanced up at the promenade. It was sort of hidden in the darkness. And I saw some movement. When I saw that, I immediately got on my alert, and I said, there's something up there. And she said, what do you mean? I said, something was moving. I saw something moving up there. And she said, no, there's nobody here. There's only us. So I stopped looking up there and went back to what I was doing. And then very suddenly, these beings all rushed us from the darkness. They just came out of the darkness of the building, and they grabbed onto Cindy. They grabbed me and pulled me away from her. She was screaming for help, calling me, and I couldn't move. They laid me on the floor, and I was paralyzed. And I could hear her calling me. I couldn't do anything about it, and I was really terrified. I didn't know what was going to happen. So I could see that they were around her on the desk, but I couldn't see what they were doing. So we must have been like that for about 20 minutes or so. I was laying on the floor. Finally, one of the beings came over, and he picked me up, and he said, you can be on your way now. He said, we're not going to hurt you or anything. He said, you can go back to where you came from. And so he brought us over to the loose panel. And I remember him telling me telepathically, you're going to forget this incident. As soon as you leave, you'll forget it. And so I pushed the panel open. I got out and I brought Cindy out. And as I was pulling her out, I saw the being again, and it kind of surprised me. And then immediately after I got her out, I was going to look again. The thought just went right out of my head. This was in the winter time as well, and we had our winter coats on and stuff. So we decided to go across the street. There was a bar called the Meeting Place, and we used to go there and have a couple of drinks and dance. They usually had disco playing, a disc jockey. So we went over there, and we didn't stay very long. We just looked in and there was nobody there that we knew. So we turned around and we went back out. And then I took her home. When she got home, she walked in the door and her parents were sitting on the couch waiting for her. And as soon as she came in, she took off her coat and hung it up in the closet and she ran upstairs. And when she got upstairs, she noticed that her blouse was all buttoned all wrong and that it was kind of pulled out of her skirt. And she was wondering if her parents had seen that, but they didn't say anything. So anyway, I know I didn't do that. I wouldn't have been that careless. I would have made sure that she looked like she did when she left. Anyway, that was all that I recalled of that.
And so you didn't see what was going on with her then?
No, I was on the floor, and again, all I could move was my eyeballs. I couldn't turn my head or anything, but I could hear her. It worried me.
And do you know if she had any repercussions or fallout from that experience?
No, I didn't know much about UFOs at that time or aliens. I believed that they were real, but I never remembered any of my previous encounters because after you have an encounter with them, they erase your memory. They wipe it. I was about 22, 23.
Yeah.
That was about how old I was. I had other incidents or fragments of incidents since then, but they may have done something to block my ability to remember, because I was remembering by sheer will. Because when they tell me that I was going to forget an incident, I'd argue with them. I'd say, no, I'm not going to forget this. I'm going to remember everything. And I think that might be one of the reasons why I don't remember any later encounters occurring as I was older. Bud Hopkins once told me that once you have recall of your incidents and you have an investigation done of your UFO case, he said they stopped coming around. He said that's what I found anyway.
Oh, that's interesting then.
There have been other fragments of memory that I would like to know more about. And so I do need to have some more hypnosis sessions done. One of them was when I was with my first wife. We went on a picnic at a place in Niagara Falls called Fireman's Park. And there's an upper level to this park and a lower level. And we drove to the lower level and there's a parking lot there and a set of iron stairs that goes down to the lower level. And it's pretty down there. There's like a pond and it's kind of picturesque. There's a bit of forest area that you can walk in. So we took the hibachi down there to make a barbecue and we had this barbecue and all of a sudden this brown dog showed up out of nowhere. I don't know if it had escaped from its master or what, but it came over and we were playing with this dog and I gave it some steak and that. And after the barbecue, we decided we were leaving. And when we walked over to the bottom of the stairs, there was an older man standing there and he was staring up the stairs like he was looking at something. I glanced up to see what he was looking at. And there was this black hole in the sky. It looked like it was round, but it was extremely black. You couldn't see anything in it. I've never seen that black a hole before. And at first I thought it was a craft, but it wasn't moving. It was just like a hole in the sky. And he was staring at this and we were looking at it too. And then at that point, I don't remember anything else after that. I just remember the hole. It was probably like a portal or something, I guess. There was another incident where I was with my friend that I'll call Jim Voss. He was a kid I used to play with when I was younger. I guess I'd have to say I was about 10 years old, maybe, when I used to hang out with him. And there was this ravine behind my house, that there was a big patch of sumac trees growing there. And we used to play down the bank, we called it. There was a set of rock steps that would take you down there, kind of. So one day we were playing down there and I was standing by the sumac trees. Jim was standing maybe 40 or 50 feet away from me. And he called out to me. He said, "Steve, look, there's like a spaceman here. And I looked, he was standing there on the road. There was a road at the bottom of the ravine, the dirt road. And standing on that road was a gray being. And he looked like basically like this like a sculpture a model that I made of this being. And he had
So he was all in that blue, all in one?
yeah, I felt like it was dark blue, or could have been black, but I think it was dark blue. And when I recalled this incident, it was in Toronto. I was under hypnosis, and the Canadian UFO Research Network was following up my case. And they asked me, did this being have any kind of insignia? And I said, yes, there was an insignia on its chest, and I think possibly on its shoulder as well. So while I was under hypnosis, Harry Tokars, one of the investigators, asked the hypnotist, can I ask him a question? And she said, yeah. So Harry asked me, he said, can you see the insignia? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, zoom in on it and look at it closely and remember what that insignia looks like, because I'm going to ask you to draw it later. And I said, okay. So in my mind, I was picturing this thing, but I couldn't see it really clear. I could see 3 stars and what looked like a chevron sideways, and sort of a symbol that looked like Saturn with rings around it. And that's what I saw when he said, zoom in on it and remember it. So later on, I did draw it for him, and I also put it on my drawing of this being. You can see it here.
Lovely
Yeah.
drawing.
Uh-huh. So people have asked me about that insignia, but I'm still not sure that I got it accurate.
Both the drawing and the figurine, that's really very
Yeah,
good.
this being took us both to a house further down this dirt road where a little girl that I used to play with lived there. And at the time they brought us there, the house was empty. The garage was open, and inside the garage, there was a black Cadillac, what looked like a black Cadillac. As we were walking toward the house, I was starting to get kind of freaked out, that wondering what was going to happen. And they had a small trailer there. It was like a 16-foot trailer or so that we used to play house in. So I ran to this trailer and I got underneath it. So I was afraid. And the being and my friend kept telling me, Steve, come on out. What are you doing? And I said, I'm not coming out. And I could see this gray being's arm reaching in there trying to grab me. And so I was moving away from it. And he kept saying, come on out. It's okay. And finally, they got a hold of me and they pulled me out. So I was with Jim, and they brought us over to the garage where this Cadillac was. When I went in there, there were 3 beings, and one of them seemed to be trying to look human. He had a wig on, and he was talking to me in what sounded in my head like a gruff sounding voice. And I said, oh, are you Mr. Montrose? That's similar to the name of the people that lived in that house, the pseudonym. And he said, yes. And he said, we're going for a little ride. So he put Jim and I in the back seat, and I could see him in the front seat driving the vehicle with this wig on. And next to him were 2 bald-headed gray beings.
So this guy is actually driving this
He
vehicle?
was driving it, yeah. And but he seemed artificial. He didn't seem like a real human. He backed the car out, and he started going up the dirt road. We were sitting in the back. There was another road further down that still exists right near the canal, the 12-Mile Creek. And he took us down to the second road, and there was a big brick building that firemen used to use it for training, and they'd set fire in this brick building and they'd spray it with the hoses and stuff. And also the Sea Cadets used to practice their instruments down there. I used to hear them playing quite a bit. And so I knew that area, but most of it was bush again. and they took the car only so far and they couldn't go any farther. They made us get out and we started walking down this path. And we came to like a rise in the ground, sort of leveled off into like a plateau. And there was this saucer-shaped craft sitting there on this plateau. And I remember walking up to it with them. It seemed to have like a dome on the top of it and lights around it and portholes, but I couldn't really remember much more detail than that. And then that is where the fragment of memory ended for there. And then later I remember them bringing us back in that car again. So I don't know what happened, if they took us in the ship or what they did. I'm assuming they must have taken us inside.
And do you have a sense of the size, the sort of dimensions of the ship?
I want to say about 40 or 50 feet in diameter, but I can't be sure. But anyway, so when they brought us back to the house and they pulled the limousine back into the garage, the beings got out and they spoke to Jim for a few seconds, and then Jim turned around and he walked away from them and started heading back to the ravine where we were playing. And then this being came over to me and he said, "You're going to forget everything that happened." And I said, "No, I am not going to forget. I'm going to remember this." And I was very argumentative, and he could see he wasn't getting anywhere with me because I just adamantly refused the mind wipe. I wasn't going to forget. And so he paused for a minute. It's like he was trying to decide what to do. He glanced down at the ground and there were some dandelions on the grass there. And he pointed to the dandelion. He said, "What is this flower called?" Down, I said, "It's a dandelion." And immediately he sunk that command into me that I was going to forget. And I forgot. It was like all he needed to do was distract the barrier that I was putting up. It was a distraction technique to break my concentration. And as soon as I told him what the flower was, that was it. I dropped the barrier and gave him a second to get in there. So I forgot the incident. And I went back and I joined my friend Jim, and we continued playing near the sumac trees. And that was all I remember of that incident.
And then you had the memory. Was that one that came back with the help of Bud and Aphrodite Lamar?
That memory came back in Toronto under hypnosis. I was working with QFORN, the Canadian UFO Research Network, and they documented my case and they did a lot of research. They came to the house, they met my dad, they asked him about the incident I had with him, and they basically, I became friends with them. I used to go up to Toronto on the weekends to have a hypnosis session done. And so a lot of what I remember came from those days. There was a symposium there, and that's how I was put in touch with them. It was a UFO symposium at the Hummingbird Center in Toronto. And they had speakers there, and I saw J. Allen Hynek at one point. He was one of the speakers. I'm kicking myself now that I didn't go and introduce myself and shake hands with them. Because,
well, Steve, I have to say, thank you very much for coming back to the ET Newsroom. So I'd just like to say not only a big thank you, I'm sending you a hug from this side of the pond, and all the very best wishes for your health and wellness. And also, I am just starting to write up the Eklectia book. I've been threatening to do it for ages. Now it's happening. So thank you again for being part of Eklectia, which is a totally unique compilation album, international, of course. And I think it's going to be a wonderful thing once it unfolds down the line. So.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. You can get my book from Amazon. It's called Beyond the Extraterrestrial Firewall, An Experiencer's Point of View.
It's brilliant.
I have a Facebook group called Beyond the Extraterrestrial Firewall, and I also have one on Telegram. The one on Telegram is a little more politically orientated. I did have a website. It has been taken down. I found it to be kind of on the expensive side, but I'm planning that I'll probably build another one at some point.
Well,
So,
that's great, Stephen. Lovely to see you again. Give my love to Canada. I'll get over
okay,
there one day. Hopefully
good to
we'll
see you
meet.
again. Thank you.
All right. God bless you. Take care. Bye for now.
Bye now.